But the Guardians have been throughout the season sort of the best team in the American League. They've been very consistent, and that's going to transition us from, did the contenders do enough? And I'm going to tell you that the Guardians didn't, which moves us to the most disappointing buyers. They get Lane Thomas and Alex Cobb. Now, we don't expect the Guardians to buy big, but that's their big addition to a rotation that needed an arm, is Alex Cobb. I don't know. I don't really know if that was enough to bolster that rotation. And Lane Thomas is a guy that has drastic splits, sort of a platoon bat. He's going to start there, but I think his OPS this year is like 660 against right-handed pitching and then over 900 against lefties. So I did not love what they did at all.
I am looking forward to, not because I'm really excited, but just because it's very interesting to have a three-man outfield of Stephen Kwan, Lane Thomas, and Miles Straw. Like three guys that might not reach 10 home runs. Stephen Kwan has got 11 so far this year. They're more speedy leg boys, if you will, in their outfield. I think that was probably disappointing. When we talk about the Minnesota Twins, even more disappointing. So now maybe you feel a little bit better. Alex Cobb, I think is still a question mark. You don't know what you've got until you see that. If he turns out to end up being a really good acquisition from the Giants, great. You did a wonderful job. But until that happens, I think you could have supported this roster a little bit more. So is the fact that it was a seller's market kind of really what prevented them from being a little bit more aggressive. But the fact that they gave up the prospect capital that they did just to get Lane Thomas, does leave you a little bit worried. But look, when they got Miles Straw, it didn't seem like they were adding that much at the time. And he's turned out to be a critical addition to that roster over the last couple of years. So maybe the same thing happens again. We'll kind of wait and see what happens. But yeah, I really just think they kind of held serve in a lot of ways at this year's deadline.
Lane Thomas last year, he hit 28 home runs, and this year he hasn't been that guy.
Yeah.
There is a world where Lane Thomas can turn it on with the Guardians and make everything worth it, going to a better winning situation. Yeah, there is a chance that one works out. I think for me, I look at the deficiencies of what he's done this year and the package it took to get him, because you say, oh man, the guy has stolen 28 bases. He's been caught 12 times. You look at his OPS. Oh, it's 738. Well, I told you those splits. Granted, I'm looking here. He is in his first 2 games with the Guardians. He's 3 for 8, and he's got a couple doubles, and he's scored 3 runs, got an OPS over 1,000. So he's doing good so far. We'll see. And then the Alex Cobb one, granted, that could look really good. So what I will say about the Guardians compared to some of these other teams we're going to talk about in the most disappointing buyers, there is a world where it ends up working out very well for them. And I'll give them credit for that. At least they didn't do nothing. They got a couple of guys that could be impact pieces. I just don't completely buy into it.
You have to wonder just how much the new playoff format impacts what teams are doing at the trade deadline, because you have to win at minimum 3 series. So it becomes a crapshoot. So now winning a World Series that involves a little bit more luck, right? So again, it's about going to the postseason as many times as possible, so you don't give up, again, the prospect capital that is required to add more so at the trade deadline. So I kind of understand where Cleveland comes from, but you're right. You're kind of a little disappointed for a roster that's been one of the best in baseball, one of the best in the American League. Go out and give them even more to work with. And they obviously didn't do that.
And if I guess kind of building off what you're saying there when it comes to the format, if you're looking at who's in this race and you're looking at a wide open runway to win your division, and the Twins are maybe the team closest to you, and all they do is get Trevor Richards, maybe you feel even better about your deadline. So moving to the Twins, I would be so frustrated as a Twins fan, because not only do they not add, they have to leak out there that, oh, well, we'd like to add, but we have to shave some salary. And then you look at their books, and unless they're trading Carlos Correa, what salary are you dealing? You really need to deal, Max Kepler to go make an addition, and then it's addition by subtraction. It's just, I would be very frustrated as a Twins fan, because they're crying poor, and you have a team that's pretty damn good who could have actually made a run this year. Maybe they still do, but they just really didn't shop at all, it seems like.
Yeah, they had an opportunity for sure to get in this race. And especially when we talk about what happened to the Kansas City Royals, you say, man, the Twins really missed an opportunity to add to this this roster, and maybe, you know, they're gonna have to come up with a new plan for this offseason, because you're right. I don't know where they could have subtracted other than their superstar contracts, which you can't really get away from. I mean, shoot, you get rid of a guy making $30+ million a year, that's going to afford you a lot of flexibility. But when you lose someone like a Carlos Correa, should they go that route, well, now you have an even bigger hole to fill. So it seems like they're struggling right now to kind of balance it all, and making it work, being big boys when it comes to these larger contracts and superstar players, but also finding a way to make additions at the trade deadline. It really seems like they don't have it figured out. They've got more questions than answers.
They do, and I don't see a world where they can even move Carlos Correa because of his injury concerns. And then this is the one that they might be able to move is Pablo Lopez, but he hasn't had a good season. He's going to start making $21.75 million for the next 3 years. I think that's going to hamstring them a lot, and maybe they can still move him, but you're probably not going to get a return if you do, or you have to eat money to get a return. So, yeah, they're in a bad spot for sure. Staying in the Central but moving to the National League, the Brewers. So they did stuff. They early, as you note here, they get Aaron Savali. They then trade for Frankie Montas, and they also get Nick Mears. So they did add some pitching, but I think we were all hoping that they would get someone that could slide next to Freddie Peralta in a playoff rotation and really feel confident about that game 2 starter. And now is the game 2 starter still Colin Ray? I think it might be. I don't love what they did because they did not address their biggest need with a guy that has potential to, I think, start a playoff game, and you feel good about it.
Yeah, I think these mid-tier and middle market clubs, they have to be careful. They have to be a little bit cautious and kind of work around those margins.
But they have such a good farm system. That's the thing. They could go for it this year, and I get it. It's about a long window. I understand why they do it, and you know they're going to tell us that, look, when we're still good in 2028, it's because we didn't, you know, make a foolish trade in a seller's market now, and I understand that. But man, when you have a chance, I just feel like at some point you might look back and say, man, we had that window with all those bites at the apple, and we never decided to really go for it. And at some point, the luck's going to run out, and they're going to go through a rebuild. And I just hope that they get there at some point during this window where they had to contend.
I think because there just wasn't that superstar option that they would have been able to go out and get. Like a number 2 starter is, I don't want to say is a little bit suspect, but you're not a number 1 starter. If there was a number 1 starter, maybe you do go all in and you make an acquisition like you did in 2008 and you get CC Sabathia and you go, hey, we feel pretty good about that. Now, we did give up a lot, and maybe that's what they're thinking about. Maybe that's too fresh in their heads to go, man, because of what we had to part with, was that really worth it to go all in on one season? And maybe we just had to try and see what would happen when we did something like that. And maybe it plays out in our favor. And maybe we broke even, but this was not a year where we thought, and worst case scenario, we're going to break even. We're going to end up, losing our asses if we give up, this prospect capital, because we need to hold on to it for the future. How much did they know that Christian Yelich was going to be gone? Maybe they're working on trying to find an outfielder, and hey, without Yelich and those question marks, we're going to be taking a real big hit. So, and there's no way to make up for that offense. So maybe we acquire from the bargain rack, and we can kind of play those guys up like we did our entire roster on opening day. And you say, Pat Murphy is no Craig Counsell. This team is going to be maybe 4th place in the NL Central. And Pirates fans probably said, hey, I got the Brewers last because the Pirates are going to be better than them. And yet they coach those guys up. They put them in a winning system. I have to think that the Brewers front office are looking at the guys they acquired and said, we can actually play those guys up to be as good as the frontline players that were acquired. The Phillies gave up a lot for Carlos Estevez, but they might have looked and said, Nick Mears, since somebody whispered in his ear and told him that he was tipping pitches, he was a lot better. Let's go out and get that guy, and then we don't have to pay the price that the Phillies did for a Carlos Estevez. Was that part of the logic going on behind? You'd have to ask them. But I do think that if you're a Brewers fan, you're probably frustrated a little bit, considering the fact that now you don't have Christian Yelich and you don't have a definitive number 2 starter from this year's deadline.
To me, I think they could have beaten the package that the Dodgers put up there for Jack Flaherty.
Yeah.
And if they were aggressive on that, Jack Flaherty as a rental would have made a ton of sense. Now, granted, they would say, well, it's a rental pitcher, and if we lose in our wild card series, we just wasted those prospects for nothing. And I do understand that. And maybe they just never will shop in the rental market. But I look at the Brewers with Jack Flaherty instead of Frankie Montas, and I think that they actually are right there with the Dodgers and the Phillies as being able to really contend in the National League. Without that, I just don't think that they're going to make a deep run. Now, the Astros are our last of the disappointing buyers, and maybe Usei Kikuchi is going to be amazing for them. And I will note that we had a really good article that came out right after the trade that talked about how if Kikuchi can get his fastball up to the top part of the zone, he's almost unhittable with that pitch. The problem, he's pulling it and it's down in the heart of the zone and he's getting crushed. If they can fix that, maybe Kikuchi is a real answer for them. Maybe he's starting a playoff game in the ALCS and all of us eat our words, but you give up a massive return for a rental pitcher with an ERA close to 5 who has been terrible lately. He had a great string of starts in the beginning of the season, has been awful to get that ERA close to 5. And that's pretty much all they do. So to me, the Astros are big losers of this deadline, very disappointing buyers. It just shows a team that feels desperate to make sure that they don't let this maybe final year or two of their window slip. So they go for it. And I guess I could commend that, but man, that's a pretty bad trade. It feels like.
It does. It does. They did not get back enough in return. And what they did give up for their one guy, not enough. So I think there's a lot of fans disappointed. Again, that's what we're talking about, the teams that were most disappointing at this year's deadline. And, we've been talking about it all season, you and I, Ryan, about, is this the last run for the Astros? And that, they were going to allow this team to get back into this race, and they got back into the race rather quickly. It didn't take the last week in September for them to seize the AL West. And despite the fact that they are, doing that right now, could they have used a little bit, extra oomph for the postseason? Yes. But are they going to need those extra prospect bullets for 2025 and 2026 with their guys that are impending free agents? Very much so. I think I said on the Just Baseball Trade Deadline podcast, maybe Yusei Kikuchi is one of those guys where we're going to bring him in, and whether or not they sign him to an extension before the season is up remains to be seen. But maybe he's one of those players that they can convince, hey, stick around. When you become a free agent next year, we'll give you a 2-3 year deal, whatever it is, similar to the Justin Verlander situation where, hey, look, this is a place where you want to stick around and be a part of. Maybe they're going to be able to do that with Kikuchi for whatever reason. But as of right now, present day on August 2nd, yeah, it seems like they should have done a lot more for that division, especially after you see what the Mariners did with Arozarena and Justin Turner.
And you know what? To be fair to them, it seems like they tried to offer a similar package to the Tigers for Flaherty, and the Tigers maybe made a mistake there, not jumping on it, and they didn't want to be left without anything. So you say, all right, we're going to take this package, and we're going to say, who's the next best rental? And I'm sure their whole scouting department is on it, their analytics, and they say, okay, the highest impact rental beyond Jack Flaherty is actually Yusei Kikuchi, and everything that we detail in the article about his fastball playing up in the zone, how it could be so much better, and all these different things that they can say, all right, well, if we tap into this, this, and this, we're going to get X, Y, and Z. All right, let's go for it. I can see how they make the decision. And I do think if there's a team that can make us eat our words, it's the Astros. So we'll see how it plays out.